Whoever was terrorizing that woman, I have no clue who it is. All right, it's not me. I don't know.
You're a former military?
I understand.
And you're telling me you didn't know somebody had a gun pointed at you? It's not looking good for Jeff Pelo.
I didn't do anything to anyone.
The man you just saw used to be a police sergeant. He was widely trusted by the public even as he did terrible things. He betrayed the trust of his fellow officers, his family, and the community that he swore an oath to protect, all to act out his own sick and twisted fantasies. Pelo was a veteran officer of over 17 years at the Bloomington Police Department. He was respected within the department, and everyone knew just how much he loved his 3 teenage kids. He was a husband, a father, and overall, everyone thought him to be a decent man. But he had a darker side within him, and it was all started by his interest in violent pornography.
This isn't the way we wanted this to happen, all right? We wanted you to come down here and go on all kinds of stuff, like you said, chat, all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. You know, you wrote down with Sanger, with Mildred, and as you know, we have rules that we have to go by. Just as, you know, you're very familiar with all this stuff, you know what's going on, kind of stuff, and
it's fairly evident, as it is in a lot of these cases, that the person interviewing Pelo knows him. They were in fact co-workers out in the field, and had worked together for a very long time. That does create a conflict of interest within the case, and someone else should have been brought in to interrogate him, but in small towns like this, with so few people and limited law enforcement funding, that can be difficult. In fact, on that fateful night in June of 2006, when everything went down, it was an officer that Pelo himself had trained that caught him and arrested him for his terrible crimes. And the evidence just piled and piled up to the point where it was undeniable. A cover-up wouldn't have even been possible.
we want to talk about what's going on, because we're not absolutely sure what's going on. Okay?
What are you talking about?
I have to read you your rights first.
Am I under arrest?
At this point, you're not free to go. At this point.
The officer here claims that he doesn't know what's going on. And this is a defense mechanism that we've heard fairly often when it comes to interrogating someone that one knows. Putting up a friendly front so that the person in trouble doesn't feel threatened or attacked, and therefore might slip up and reveal some piece of information. It's unclear whether the officer is doing this knowingly or not, because it's quite clear what Pelo did. During this dark period, Pelo utilized his position of trust within law enforcement to gain access to victims' homes. He exploited this authority to commit acts of sexual assault and violence, leaving a trail of trauma and distress in his wake. The brazen nature of his actions, combined with his knowledge of police procedures, allowed him to evade suspicion for a distressingly extended period. Even while using police computers and equipment to learn information about his victims, he wasn't caught. As the number of reported cases increased, authorities intensified their efforts to identify the perpetrator responsible for the reign of terror. The investigation ultimately revealed Pelo's involvement through a combination of forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and diligent police work. Even so, many of the officers working within the office didn't want to believe it.
I'm under arrest. If I'm not free to go, I'm under arrest.
Well, we're in a custodial situation. That's why I'm going to read you your rights.
All right.
Because you came down here in their car. I don't know where we're going to go. I don't know where we're going to
What's
go.
going on? I don't even know what you're talking about.
I understand that, Jeff, and you understand, just like I do, that I can't talk about anything until we get this little bit out.
It's evident here that Pelo is hostile. He demands to know if he's under arrest, which is the smart thing to do if you're ever in this situation. There are rights that are afforded to you that are different depending on whether or not you are being detained, and you should figure it out as soon as possible. Pelo in this instance knows all of the rules and will do everything that he can in order to use that to his advantage.
Last night, all right, there was an issue that came up, right? Out on southwest side of town. All right? You know what I'm talking about? I want to hear what you have to say about it, and I'm really hoping there is a good explanation for it all.
The interrogating officer is giving Pelo an opportunity to explain what happened the previous night in his own words. This is likely an attempt to get some sort of confession or statement out of him, but it's not really done with serious conviction. The officer knows that it's going to be harder to get the details out of Pelo, but he does come armed with the knowledge of what happened. On this fateful night, a vigilant neighbor noticed suspicious activity near a residence in the vicinity. Acting quickly, they contacted the local police to report their concerns. Responding officers swiftly arrived at the scene, where they found Pelo lurking near the targeted house. His behavior and presence raised immediate suspicions, and upon questioning, he failed to provide a satisfactory explanation for his presence in the area. And when they looked into similar cases from nearby, some pretty nasty patterns started to emerge.
Did you meet up with the police officer last night?
You're talking about Zena.
Yes.
When I was walking around by the lake, looking at the lake down there. Again, I drove down there, I couldn't sleep. All right, houses come up for sale in that area all the time. I'm interested in buying my mother-in-law a house. She lives up in Ridley. She's poor. She's on fixed income. I want her to move closer to us. Houses come for sale. There's a townhome right there for sale. It won't work, but anyway, I was looking to see what kind of access went down to that lake. That's all. All right, I was starting to walk around, parked, walked down, looked at the lake. When I was leaving,
Where'd you park it?
I don't know the name of the street.
But it wasn't right there where you were at.
It was by the lake. That lake goes behind those houses.
There's some pretty textbook evidence of lying within this clip. Pelo's refusal to make eye contact while describing what he was doing, looking for a house to buy for his mother-in-law, gives him away easily, and the nervous fidgeting he does with his hands doesn't help him much either.
You know, you understand how difficult the situation this is for everyone involved, including yourself, really.
Yes, I understand.
And irregardless of what, our feelings are towards each other and all that kind of stuff, I think we've always got along. I think we've always been able to speak openly about that. There are just some things that happened last night that just doesn't add up. And Jeff, as a former investigator yourself, that there are things that we know, okay? Such as the way that you met up with David, You freaked him out. Why would you be in between two houses looking at houses?
I couldn't keep going straight. There's a drainage thing that goes down the lake. I couldn't keep walking. So I walked up, the dog started barking, and oh hell. So I walked up between the houses and go to the road.
There's a very obviously emotionally charged conversation going on here. The interrogating officer and Pelo talk about how they know each other pretty well, and that they've always gotten along. The officer uses this as an opportunity to ask to talk straight with him, which is a tactic often used to get a subject to open up more. This seems to have worked in this situation as well.
If you get a call of someone walking in between two houses at 12:30 in the morning,
I don't know what call brought him out there. Yes, of course.
I mean, the person who called this in has every right in the world to do this.
I have no idea who called it in. All right. What they called in wasn't me. All right. Dave said last night somebody knocked on somebody's door. I didn't knock on anybody's door. I didn't knock on anybody's door. I did not knock on anybody's door. I don't know what else you're trying to allege here. I don't want to jump to some kind of conclusion. Right? All this isn't about because I walked up from that lake up between those two houses.
Absolutely.
I don't know what else you're talking about.
we're talking about you standing up with your back to the house and trying not to be identified. What? Having your back up against the house and not trying to be seen as David walks by.
I was walking up, I saw someone coming, so I stopped. I turned to go back. Again, the dog's barking. I didn't want somebody to think I was doing something wrong. He said, "Stop, police." I was like, "Oh, hell." So I turned around and walked up to him. I wasn't standing with my back against no house.
Well, I think you're minimizing a little bit.
I'm not minimizing anything.
He said, "Stop, police." Was there a little bit more than that?
No, that's what he said.
You didn't see the gun he had pulled on you?
It's a bit bizarre how angry Pelo is getting about this. He was walking between two houses at 12:30 in the morning in dark clothes. That's obviously very sketchy, and anybody in their right mind would call the police if they were in this situation. The fact that he's so angry goes to show that there's something else going on behind the curtain.
See, you know all the things we say. You've been sitting in this chair before. All I'm saying is that what you need to do is think about just exactly what you're saying. Before you answer, before you jump back with a conclusion, Jeff, you need to think about what you're saying. You need to think about what the scenario was right there. You know, I think I need to take it a step further. Okay, because the lady scared to death. Scared to
I don't know
death.
nothing about the lady.
What I'm telling you is I'm telling you she was scared to death. She was an absolute basket case.
It wasn't for me.
What? Yes, you were in between the houses. You were in between the houses. What if this would have
I
happened?
walked up between the houses and Zima was there. That's the one time I went between the houses.
What if this would have happened? Would you be a little bit concerning to her?
But I don't understand what you're saying. The only time I walked between those two houses was when I was walking from the lake and up.
But that's
Right.
where you and
That's when I met Zima.
that's where you and Officer Zima differ in what you said.
But whatever the lady was scared of, it wasn't me.
It was you.
How could it be me? The one time I was between the houses, when I walked up and Zima was there, she'd already called.
Jeff,
Pelo's crimes were not isolated incidents. He embarked on a spree of attacks, targeting multiple victims over a span of years. This deliberate repetition demonstrated a disturbing level of premeditation and a disregard for the well-being of those he victimized. In one instance, Pelo exploited his knowledge of police procedures to break into a home under the guise of a routine investigation. Once inside, he subjected the occupants to a terrifying ordeal, assaulting them both physically and sexually. His use of law enforcement background to gain entry highlighted the unsettling abuse of trust.
I mean, I don't know how simple it is. It's not.
it's not that simple.
I didn't have ill intent of any kind.
That's it. It's not that simple.
I mean, that's it.
It's not that simple. I mean, she is a young, attractive lady.
I don't know
Very
who she
attractive.
is.
And like I said, I know, I've seen you how you take a genuine interest in people, okay? And I think if you knew what you did to this person, because I'm telling you, she's freaking
did not do anything to her.
You were there, right?
When Pelo begins to talk about the woman that lived within the house, his lies begin to spiral even further. It's almost as though he believes his own lies, even though he's likely making them up on the spot. It's bizarre to see someone so dedicated to so many things that are provably false. He was there that night, observed sneaking around, and is only now trying to save face because he was caught. Nobody's going to believe that he was looking at property at midnight.
First of all, is there any reason that you can tell me why David Zima would lie about this situation? Because I'll tell you what, he's freaked out too. Because you're one of his mentors.
All right.
You're one of his mentors. He is.
I don't know how I freaked him out.
You don't know how he freaked out. Well, I mean, he couldn't even hardly talk. He was so upset by the situation. He talked about how you were, one of his mentors. You were his FTO training sergeant. Right. And I mean, he looked up to you.
All right, I understand that, all right?
The interrogating officer now asks Pelo why David, the officer who apprehended him on the night he was found, would lie about the situation. He also explains that the younger officer was terrified because he was taking one of his mentors into custody. He didn't understand how he could be the one committing such a terrible crime. But even so, it didn't lead to a cover-up. That's a credit to the younger officer, thankfully.
The only time I went between those two houses is when I went from the lake to go to the road because I couldn't go no further.
But that's not what David is saying.
All right. I don't know what his perception of the situation was. He has, did I pause and turn to go away? Yes. Did I realize, if I realized at first that it was a police officer, I wouldn't even have paused. I'd have kept on walking. Period. All right. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I had nothing to hide. If I'd have realized it was a police officer, anyone, Zane or anybody, I'd have just kept on walking when he broke stride. I thought it was someone that lived there. I was like, oops. I mean, the dog was barking.
You thought it was someone who lived there, so you were going to try to get away from the person who was living there?
What? Yeah, I was walking out and started.
Pelo is unable to reasonably explain why he would attempt to run away if he was just doing as he said, which leads him to stumble and stutter over his words. This seems to be a common defensive mechanism for the man, as he continually repeats himself, slaps his legs, and does all sorts of nervous tics in order to try and keep himself calm. He knows the trouble of the situation that he is in, but he doesn't know how to safely navigate out of it.
I want you to take a minute and think about what we're talking about. Because if you take a minute and you think about it, and you put all...
I don't have to think about it. That's what happened.
You put all the things together, Jeff. That happened.
All right. Again,
And you come up to a conclusion.
how it may seem, all right, is not,
It's just a coincidence? It's
Yes.
just a coincidence?
I didn't do anything wrong last night. I didn't do anything to anyone. Again,
You didn't do anything, Danny.
If you listen carefully to Pelo's wording, you'll notice that he places heavy emphasis on the fact that he didn't do anything wrong last night. And that's true. He was sneaking around, but during that night he hadn't assaulted anybody and hadn't broken into anybody's home. He's trying to use a sliver of truth in order to mask the fact that he both had done terrible things before and was planning on doing terrible things before he was caught by his fellow police officer.
And then we can't discount what the lady says. Her dog's barking its head off. Right?
yeah. Down by the lake, yeah, dog's barking his head off.
And,
Well, any dog was barking, I don't know where it was at.
okay.
We notice Pelo starting to unravel in a way. He seems more sluggish and lethargic to respond to questioning, because at this point, he's keeping nearly 70 lies straight in his head. He knows very well what it looks like, even though he won't admit it to the interrogating officer, and he wants nothing more than to be out of this situation. He knew that if he was perhaps seen by a civilian or something, he could play it off. But being caught by another cop was absolutely damning. Both the officer and the victim have different stories from him, and he knows that his own shaky account wouldn't hold up for anything in court.
You were not Sergeant Pelo last night. You were absolutely somebody else. And we can sit here and you can say, this is what I did, and I can sit here and say, this is what we know till the cows come home. But you know in your heart exactly what happened.
Yes,
Yes.
I went down, looked at that lake, walked between those houses, go back to the road, put down my truck, and that's what happened. That was the only time I was between those houses.
Pelo is continuing his web of lies, and it's becoming increasingly clear to the interrogating officer that this is someone that is not going to break their own story. Even after being caught doing something heinous, Pelo is going to ride it out for as long as he can without giving himself up or making it easy for the officers.
I've seen this lady. Okay, like I said, let me give you a different scenario. I've seen this lady. She's extremely attractive.
I haven't seen her, I have no idea who she is.
As you're walking through the two houses, do you see anybody in the windows?
I'm not looking in the windows, I didn't see
I'm
anybody.
not saying you're looking in the windows. At this point, I'm not saying you're looking in the windows.
I wasn't even walking next, the house I was walking next to didn't even have windows on that side.
Jeff, okay, I know. Remember, I know the answers to my questions.
I understand.
All right. How far apart are these houses?
I didn't measure them, I don't know. They're not very far. Your standard house, they're closer than your standard house. Yes, unless you go on the old side of town where they're really close to each other. The house I was walking next to didn't even have windows on that side of the house.
Pelo is showing one of the holes in his story at this point, and it's safe to say that he's unraveling quite quickly. If he was just looking at property, why did he pay enough attention to remember if the house had windows on that side of the wall? And why is it a piece of information he seems to be clinging to so strongly? It's strange to say the least.
We always use these lines as cliches. I did not know it's true. I did not say anything to anyone. That your guts are just screaming at you.
No, they're not, because I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything to anyone. Period. I didn't do anything to anybody.
This is the point where the interrogating officer has to determine that this is a lost cause, and that Pelo won't be giving up any more information. Even after an hour of interrogation, he's gleaned very little that he didn't already know. Luckily enough, an armada of forensic evidence was on his side. Jeff Pelo's trial was a landmark moment in the pursuit of justice for the community that had been haunted by his reign of terror. As the legal proceedings unfolded, they laid bare the full extent of his crimes, revealing a disturbing pattern of calculated violence and abuse of power. The courtroom became a stage where the stories of victims were heard, their experiences giving voice to the horrors they had endured. The prosecution presented a comprehensive case against Pelo, marshaling an array of evidence that included forensic analyses, witness testimonies, and circumstantial connections. The fact that he had exploited his background as a police officer to gain access to victims' homes and manipulate his targets became a central theme in the trial. The abuse of trust and the betrayal of his role as a protector added a layer of gravity to the charges he faced. Ultimately, the culmination of the trial came with the jury's unanimous verdict: guilty on multiple counts related to sexual assaults and home invasions. The courtroom's atmosphere was charged with a mix of relief and closure for the victims and their families, as well as a sense of accountability finally catching up with the perpetrator. Jeff Pelo was sentenced to a staggering 440 years in prison, a reflection of the severity of his crimes and the collective demand for justice. His conviction served as a testament to the resilience of the survivors and the dedication of law enforcement and legal professionals who worked tirelessly to ensure that he was held accountable for the devastation he had caused.